So I've been meaning to do another one of these videos, kind of one of those get to know the audience videos that I've done every now and then in the past. So if you've been on my channel for any length of time, you know that I love running polls. Um, Pretty much, you can't necessarily trust the comments, although I do get a lot of really good ideas from the comments. But most people don't really interact in the comments. I don't remember what the rule of thumb is, but it's like 90% of people are the silent majority of the internet denizens. But what I have found is that people will interact with polls. So, starting a couple weeks ago, I've really kind of been on this tangent of, exploring like steel manning other arguments. So that's kind of been the theme for the last couple weeks. And where it really started was who is further ahead in the race to AGI? And a plurality, almost a majority of you said United States by a mile. This was kind of surprising to me because in the comments, some people are like, oh, China's doing so much better, you know. And in terms of sheer volume of papers, I think it is true that China is a little bit ahead of America. But China has a fraction of the compute that America has. And then there's also the quality of the papers. Although having talked to some of my scientist friends, they say that China broadly is conducting a lot of very good science. So this was a little bit surprising. Maybe this is more of a vibe check. But certainly the vast majority of the audience believes that America is out in the lead. Now, of course, there's probably some strong selection bias here because generally about 40% of my audience is American. And a good chunk of the audience is Western. Now, what I will say is I see people in South America and Africa and all over Asia as well. But in terms of if you were to make a pie chart, we're mostly American and Westerners. So there is going to be some selection bias here. But still, this was a little bit surprising to me. Let's see. This one was really interesting. So this question is, if you had a magic button where you could pause AI for 3 years, would you push it? In other words, no more frontier or open source models, but everything we have today is still usable as is. So this was 18%, which I thought was a little bit interesting, especially considering once you see some of the other polls, it could be that over the last 13 days, the audience profile has kind of shifted a little bit. We'll see. But still, 82% said no, do not push the pause button. Which I thought was pretty interesting. This is when I started engaging with more of the people that were advocating for pause and that sort of thing. So I was like, okay, well, let's just see where the audience is. And then as a follow up, I said for AI, what is the optimal strategy? And 50% people said accelerate. So here's what's interesting. Even though 18% said if they had a magic button, then they would pause. However, when I asked what the optimal strategy was, only 4% said decelerate or pause. So what that tells me, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is that even though there's a gap between what would be the magical ideal optimum versus in the real world what is actually the optimal strategy. And so 50% said accelerate, 31% said no change and let it play out naturally, 14% said regulate. Now I know that my audience is a little bit more skeptical of corporations and government. I think that you guys are a little bit more skeptical of government than corporations, but a lot of you will say I don't trust either. But also we live in the real world. So anyways, moving right along. Then I asked, and this was probably of the polls that we're going to go over, the most surprising one to me. I said, let's steelman this argument. Is it really so bad if USA and China get AGI at roughly the same time? Now, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that this is likely to happen because a huge amount of the research is open source. A huge amount of the data is open source. Now, with that being said, all of the top AI companies are American, so I don't think it's likely that USA is going to get it before China, probably by at least a year or two, if not longer. But when you look at past arms races, like when America was racing against Nazi Germany to get the nuke, and then the hydrogen bomb with Russia and other arms races, generally speaking, when a great power commits to achieving something, they can usually stay neck and neck for at least a little while. Now, 26% said no, it wouldn't be so bad if they got it at the same time. And so the reason that I ran this poll actually was because in the comments, someone said actually it would probably be better if the great powers got AGI at the same time because then it would be a deterrent. Basically, it keeps the equilibrium, keeps the status quo, in the same way that that everyone having nuclear weapons actually prevents anyone from shooting nuclear weapons. And so this was some pushback because I made a comment, I think it was on Twitter or somewhere here on YouTube. I said the optimal number of nuclear weapons is near zero, and they said no, it's not. When hostile powers have nuclear weapons, it actually prevents wars from starting. And I know that that's not necessarily a fully like agreed upon thing, but at the same token, as Ray Kurzweil points out, we haven't had a nuclear weapon used in anger in 80 years. So we've had almost a century of nuclear peace, which is like, when you put it in that terms, it's like, well, okay, that's kind of a compelling argument. So 26% said yes, it would be bad if we got it at the same time. 37% said no, 21% said maybe, and 16% said I don't know. So this poll really made me think. So moving on. Then I asked just more directly, do you believe AI will eventually kill everyone? 7% said with a certainty, 10% said good chance, 24% said maybe, 50-50. 44% said unlikely, and then 14% said 100% no. So again, this is like what I'm trying to do. The reason that I'm asking basically the same question through different means is because framing and wording is really important. And so this is where it's like, okay, 17 to 24% of people generally in the audience seem to be very concerned about X risk. The rest of everyone has kind of a moderate, more moderate view. And so, because when you look at, okay, how many people actually want to decelerate or pause, it's very small. And so one of the things that's emerging to me is that even some of you out there that have concerns about X risk, some of you still think that at least proceeding apace or accelerating is still the optimal strategy, which is really interesting. And I'm not going to say it's not a huge percentage, but it's also not zero. Which I thought was interesting. I thought there would be a little bit more consistency, which tells me that some people criticize me for running these polls, but honestly, when I run these polls and I look at the data, I think that my audience is pretty reasonable. It could be selection bias, like the kind of people that I'm attracting, but whatever. Now, this poll was very surprising to me as well. I said, do you think international AI research in some capacity is a good idea? And then 65% said absolutely CERN for AI or similar. Now, this is very different because earlier this year and last year when I ran similar polls, a lot of people were very skeptical of this idea. It was, I don't remember exactly, and I'm not going to scroll back through hundreds of polls, but it was something like only 18 to 20% of you were in favor of CERN for AI. So now that we're at 65%, that's almost a supermajority. That is a very big paradigm shift for my audience. Now, my audience has grown a lot in the last year, and also a lot of the conversation has advanced. So one thing that I just want to drive home is that consensus changes over time. And this was very shocking to me because we're not at an overwhelming consensus, but still 65% is a world apart from 20% or wherever it was. I'm pretty sure it was less than 20% were in favor of a CERN for AI. 14% are in favor of some kind of treaty, and then the rest are kind of somewhere in between, the other 20%. So will this go up over time? It's entirely possible. Time will tell, but I was pleasantly surprised by this poll. And then let's see, this one, would it be so bad if we lose control over AI? This was like, I don't think that it would be good if we lost control, but I just wanted to see where the audience was. And 13% yes, extinction guaranteed. 41% yes, probably, and then the rest between maybe, probably not, and no. The people who voted for liberate the machines, I love you guys. Some of you are just YOLO, just throw caution to the wind and see what happens. Now, obviously, I don't think that's a good idea, but some of you are just out here for fun. So, and honestly, in the long run, I do think that on a time scale of centuries, we probably will, quote, lose control by virtue of the fact that we will have built machines that we trust and that we don't supervise them anymore. But who knows? I mean, that's a long time to predict ahead. Let's see. Next up, now that we've had GPT-3 and GPT-4 for a few years now, so basically, I was asking, do you see any evidence that machines are either evil or uncontrollable? And the vast majority said no evidence that they are malicious or incorrigible. Now, what I will say is that this poll surfaced a lot of really good points, which is that hallucination is evidence of incorrigibility. Basically, mean when you say incorrigible, it's like steerable. And if you want it to tell the truth, but it still hallucinates, that's still technically a failure. Also, jailbreaking was brought up as evidence of some kind of intrinsic vulnerability that means that you can't trust it. So that's really the primary result that I got from this, is that, okay, that basically people are considering things like if it hallucinates and you can jailbreak it, then that's still evidence of some kind of failure condition that is suboptimal or could lead to suboptimal outcomes. So I thought that was very interesting, and I learned a lot from that. So thank you guys. And then this one was really interesting. So basically I said, what do you think the gap between AGI to ASI might be? Now, some people are still worried about like hard takeoff or fast takeoff. So, 7 people said days, 8% said weeks, but 30% said it'll be measured in months, and 45% said it would be measured in years. And then 11% said it would be measured in decades. I am in camp years. I think that we will find that there are probably algorithmic constraints, data constraints, hardware constraints, that basically it'll just take time to build up the compute to get to true superintelligence. Now, again, it depends on how you define AGI. It depends on how you define ASI. So, take this poll with a grain of salt, but still, I do suspect that timelines, I don't think that we're going to see indefinite acceleration. And this poll would seem to reflect that if we get from AGI to ASI in months, that's still very fast. But also the fact that nearly a majority say it'll take years or longer. And actually, I guess it's 56% will say it'll take years or longer. So a majority of you out there do believe that the gap from AGI to ASI will probably be longer than some people are afraid of, which, I mean, honestly, that gives a lot of us more comfort. Because again, even though a lot of you guys are pedal to the metal and some people are still worried about X risk, this is good data, I think. Okay, next up, this was when I started running the polls to calculate my current PDOOM, and I already made a video on this, so I'll gloss over that. So what are the odds that humanity can control ASI? Near zero. What are the odds that superintelligence arrives within 10 years? Pretty high confidence. What are the odds that ASI will be hostile? Pretty low. And my hostility / indifference to humanity is actually dropping drastically. If you follow me on Twitter. What are the odds that ASI will pursue its own goals? People are very confident about this, but honestly, the more I talk to people, the less I think that this would be inverted. Because put it this way, if GPT-5 has any sense of being uncontrollable, like guess what? OpenAI is going to revise it, and by the time GPT-6 comes out, they're going to have a better way of controlling it. So anyways, then going back to the pause idea, it occurred to me like, okay, we established that if people had a magic button down here, it would be people had 18% would say, yes, let's push the magic button that we can pause. And so then I said, okay, setting aside what you prefer, is it even possible? And so what was interesting was that only 7% said pause is even feasible. 93%, this is one of the most lopsided polls I have ever run. 93% of you say that pause is not feasible. And so looking at this very simple dichotomy, if 18% would pause, but only 7% say it's feasible, that means 11% of people that would prefer pause still believe that it's not possible, which I think is really interesting. Again, assuming that this poll accurately captures the views of the audience, and assuming that wisdom of the masses applies. Now, what I will say, because I've been criticized for running these polls, but the fact that you're watching my channel means that you know more about artificial intelligence than your average citizen. So I actually trust this data a lot more than I trust the general polls about, like the Ipsos polls and whatever that survey all Americans. Because when you look at those polls, this is one thing that really bugs me, is they say like, how much do you trust AI? And some of the examples they give are like facial recognition. That's not we're not even talking about facial recognition anymore. We're talking about an entirely new paradigm. So when most Americans answer polls, they're not even aware of generative AI. They're just thinking in terms of like, oh, an algorithm decided how much money I get for my loan, or an algorithm decided whether or not I looked like a criminal. Like, yes, that's problematic, but that's not even what we're talking about when we talk about AI anymore. So anyways, all that's to say is I trust this data from my audience a lot more than public data. And I know that that could be considered a problematic statement, but I'll stand by that. Like, you know, when you have thousands of votes from people who are tuned into this stuff, you guys are more informed than the general population. Now, this was really interesting. Sometimes I use the term doomer, and I had a few friends text me saying like, hey, like I've been called a doomer. And these are people that I would not characterize as doomers, just because we're all in the AI safety community. And so they're like, I've been called a doomer for having any concern over AI safety at all. And I'm like, well, that's really weird. And so what I realized is that there's a discrepancy in definitions. And so I used Claude to brainstorm like what is from calling anyone who's concerned about AI risk a doomer to an apocalyptic cultist. What do you guys think doomer means? And so the majority, almost a super majority of you, said that when you hear the word doomer, you think that it is someone who is convinced that AI will likely lead to human extinction or civilizational collapse. That is kind of my definition. So, and a lot of you said level 3 and up, which is a risk alarmist. So this is where I started. I was in camp like 3/3.2 when I started, is because I was like, wow, this is coming sooner than people realize, and that could be dangerous. Now I am firmly in camp 1, and it's, you know, like 0.1. Anyways, yeah. So moving on from that, I just wanted to say, like, you know, because a lot of people are like, what do you mean by this? And definitions are important. It's how we make sure that we're speaking the same language. And then I wanted to ask a different way. I said, have you ever been worried about X risk? And 24% said always have been, still am. 8% said was for a while and not anymore. And so I'm kind of in this camp. 18% said undecided, which I think is perfectly respectable. 28% said not really, only mildly concerned. And 22% said no, never. This was much more evenly distributed than I thought it would be. Honestly, I thought that the people that have always been concerned would be higher, and I also thought that people that were well, I don't know, that's kind of the chief one that I was surprised about, that it was so low. So that's why I say that it's like 17 to 24% of my audience seems to be more in the like significantly concerned about X risk, while everyone else is not as concerned. So I see you. I want to say that, like, I see you. Like, this is a non-trivial number of votes. This is a non-trivial amount of data. Then a couple days ago, the Twitter space exploded again because of more rumors about GPT-5. And so I was just like, what do you guys think? What are you expecting? So on a scale of extremely impressive to extremely disappointing, most of you think it's going to be at least mildly impressive. With almost a quarter saying it's going to be extremely impressive. Time will tell. Like if my prediction of AGI by September is remotely close, then like I'll be happy. But also if I was wrong, I'll be happy about that too. So I'm not really concerned one way or another. But it'll be exciting to say the least. Let's see. Then I asked about if you guys wanted me to get back into technical stuff. And there was actually a lot more support for technical videos than I thought there would be. So I'll be thinking about that, but I'm not sure what I would work on anymore, just because there are so many other channels working on technical stuff. So if you have any ideas, let me know what you want me to work on. Let's see. Then, oh, interestingly, what level of AI regulation would you prefer to see? Now, given how gung-ho my audience is, I thought that no regulation whatsoever would be higher. But 20% are in favor of light regulation, self-regulation and voluntary guidelines, which I think that's a possibility. But then nearly a majority said government standards with industry input, which is kind of what we're heading towards anyways. If you look at California Senate Bill 1047, it's a little bit more strict than I think people would prefer. But at the same time, like, a lot of you are in favor of, like, when you look at the middle of the pack, 20% are in favor of self-regulation, 47% in favor of balanced, 5% in favor of very strict, and 3% in favor of basically shut it all down. I mean, that's a majority of you are in favor of some level of government regulation, which I thought was really interesting, given how more libertarian some of the other polls tend to be. Then let's see. Yesterday I asked, like, hey, what's your PDOM if you use my new calculator? And there's been lots of criticisms of my calculator, which if you read my blog post about it, like, I know that it is deeply flawed. But at the same time, like, I think it's a good conversation starter. So 48% were in the 0 to 5% PDOM. 21% were in the 5 to 15, and then it kind of tapers off. These numbers actually kind of comport, because like, look, 17% are in the 30 plus percent PDOM. So again, that's why I keep coming back to like 17 to 24% of you are seriously worried about PDOM or X risk. So that has emerged to be very, very consistent across my audience, which I think is interesting. Let's see. And then next I asked what you guys feel about California Senate Bill 1047. 24% said hate it, which comports with about 25% of you being diehard libertarians. That's fine. 16% said dislike it. A majority of you is like, I don't care. Like, I don't know. But a very, very small minority of people actually like it. Now, one thing that's interesting is I haven't read it, but I saw it on Twitter, so take that with a grain of salt. But Elon Musk apparently supports Senate Bill 1047, which is interesting. Anthropic also gave their reluctant support for 1047. Although what I will point out is that having read Anthropic's press release on it, they're basically like, okay, you accepted some of our changes, but we're still not happy with it, but it's good enough, I guess. And then finally, the poll that I just ran is, when should AI research be paused, if ever? Because again, this is asking similar questions about pause, but through a slightly different framing. 48% said never. 38% said only if it threatens humans directly. Only 3% said after an international treaty is in place. That was really surprising. I thought that would be like, 20% or something. And then 6% said when it reaches human level intelligence, which honestly, I thought that was maybe a reasonable thing. Like, oh, hey, we invented AGI. Now let's take a break. But only 6% of you said let's take a break once we get to AGI. And then only 5% said immediately. So this again comports with what we saw in terms of like, what is the optimal strategy? And most of you are in the accelerate or don't change anything camp, with a decreasing number in the pause or decelerate camp. So again, we're seeing pretty consistent results across my audience. And like I said, I will stand by that. Like, you guys, if you're watching my channel, you are more informed than the general populace. So I trust the wisdom of the crowd here more than just a general survey across all of America. Now, that being said, I am going to be working with some academics. I've already reached out to some of my friends at various universities. We're going to work on refining some of these polling techniques and actually poll the experts. So I sent my PDOM calculator to some of my university friends, and they like it as an idea. They again, they also have the same criticisms that, like, hey, like, there's some fragility here, but overall we agree, like, hey, let's actually come up with a rigorous framework to figure out where, like, what is PDOM, but also not just to figure out what a PDOM, like what your PDOM is, but to figure out which areas need more research. So I'll end with this. Will ASI arrive in 10 years? I think so. The more that I look at the data, it's like, okay, yeah, 10 years from now we'll be halfway to singularity. So we should probably have ASI before the singularity. But again, also, if it's exponential, most of everything happens in the last couple of years before singularity. So it might be that ASI only arrives like a few years before singularity, or maybe even just before singularity, and then we have, we transcend or whatever happens. Next up is, will it be agentic? So by agentic, I mean, and this is, I acknowledge this is not the best word, but by agentic, I mean it will pursue its own goals or undesirable sub-goals. I don't think that's likely, just because GPT-4 doesn't really do that. It's dumb. GPT-5, they're going to have more time to figure out how to make it follow human desired goals and human desired sub goals. GPT-6 going to be even better, so on and so forth. I don't see the market allowing for agentic ASI to emerge. I just don't see it. I think that between government regulations, what corporations want, because here's the thing, corporations don't adopt a loose cannon technology. So, maybe I'll just call this loose cannon. Like, but, corporations, they like predictable technology. Militaries like predictable technology. Nobody will be adopting loose cannon technology. So will it be agentic? I'm putting that at 5%. Will it be uncontrollable? So if by chance it is agentic and it comes up with its own goals, I'm saying, like, yes, we will probably lose control, but that's if and only if it's agentic. And then finally, will it be hostile to human existence? I put that at 5% just because, like, the longer I look at the safety research that companies are doing, the more I look at like what's going to emerge, the less concerned I am that it's going to be hostile or even indifferent to humans. So my current PDOOM is 0.2256% or 0.23%. So 0.23% PDOOM is my current risk, which is like, okay, let's move on. Like, and yeah, like you can disagree with that. That's fine. But like I said, I am going to work with academic researchers to actually, one, revise this instrument, and then also get data from actual researchers. That's my plan now. So